In our lives, there are events that are difficult to explain rationally. People talk about how they suddenly ended up in strange locations that don't appear on maps. Sometimes they are transported to other dimensions, and some disappear without a trace. Today, you will hear several mysterious stories that will make you think about the boundaries of our world.
I don't know if anyone will believe this, but I have to tell it. I recently moved to a new neighborhood. I live alone and work remotely, so I don't stay home all the time. Sometimes I go out for a walk and a coffee. That day, I decided to walk to a new park. Everything looked neat, with well-kept paths, young trees, and it was quiet and almost empty. I walked on a path for about 10 minutes. Having finished my coffee a while ago, I decided to leave. But when I turned back, I didn't recognize anything. I didn't see the gates or the bench I had passed. Behind me was another path with the same uniform trees, although it seemed to me that they were different a minute ago. I went back since I hadn't turned anywhere and logically should have come to the exit. But there was no exit, even though I was definitely walking backward. I wandered for another half hour and began to notice that I was returning to the same turn. It was as if I was walking in a circle, but the circle was too large to notice right away. I took out my phone and checked the map. It showed I was in the center of the park. Strange, I thought. I started moving toward the road again, but the map on my phone showed me standing still. Panic set in. I realized there were no people around and hadn't been for a long time. Suddenly, in the distance, I saw a bench, although it definitely hadn't been there before. I went to it, sat down, and covered my eyes, almost in tears. I thought, I have to call someone, but who and what would I say? I was on the verge. I thought, if there's no exit now, I'll call the police or an ambulance, and I don't care what they think. All this time, I was sitting with my face in my hands, deep in thought. Suddenly, I looked up and saw that I was at the park exit. I'm not crazy. It wasn't there a second ago. I would have noticed. Where the trees had been, there was now an exit and people were all around. I almost ran toward it, not taking my eyes off it, afraid it would disappear again. I don't know what it was. I don't have many friends to share this with. I am absolutely sure that I ended up in some strange place.
In 2004, a strange thread appeared on a Japanese forum from a girl named Hasume. She was writing in real time from her phone, agitated and with fragmented thoughts. It all started when she fell asleep on a normal suburban train. She woke up when the car was empty and saw an unfamiliar station with a sign that read Kisaragi. She immediately knew something was wrong. There was no such station on this line, and it wasn't on any map. Looking outside, Hasumi saw an empty platform with no people, no ads, and no lights. She could only see the dim glow from the train car. It was silent, except for a faint hum of drums in the distance, a monotonous, eerie rhythm, as if someone was beating out steps underground. In her messages, she said she tried to get back on the train, but the doors had closed. She couldn't reach the operator, and her phone had no signal. Soon, she saw figures of men in traditional clothing, but they didn't respond to her and looked right through her. She wrote that the people seemed not to see her. Someone on the forum suggested she call the police, but she replied that she couldn't get a signal. She could only send messages intermittently. The next piece of advice was, if the train is stopped, walk along the tracks. She followed the advice and asked people to call the police for her, but no one knew where she was. Her last messages became more and more panicked. She wrote that she was walking along a tunnel, hearing footsteps and the clang of metal behind her, and someone was whispering her name. Her last message was, "There's someone behind me. They're strange. No one ever saw or heard from her again. The police were unable to find her. Some believe it was a hoax, but a girl with that name really did disappear. Others are sure that she ended up in another world.
You're telling a scary story? I was driving on my usual route from Lucerne to Interlaken. It was a sunny day and the road was almost empty. I know every turn here. Just after Brunig Pass, I drove into a tunnel, a simple, unremarkable one. But here's the strange part. When I came out, it was nighttime. I even blinked a few times, thinking it was just overcast. But no, it was truly dark, a black sky and stars. I stopped on the shoulder and looked in the rearview mirror, and the tunnel was no longer there. Just a continuous line of trees. No entrances, no lights, as if it had never existed. I was in shock. I turned around, looked, and couldn't believe my eyes. Behind me was the normal road, but no tunnel. I should mention right away that I don't take any illegal substances and I wasn't drunk. My mental health is also perfectly fine. I looked at the road and couldn't understand how this was possible. I turned on the GPS and almost dropped my phone. I was on a completely different road, 60 kilometers from where I was supposed to be. I don't remember any forks or turns. My mind was blank. There was just a tunnel, and at the exit, I was in a different place. I stood in the middle of a night highway and my hands were shaking. Not a single car drove past. It was completely silent, and the clock said it was night. What the hell happened? I don't understand how this is possible, and I still can't comprehend it. It's hard for me to write this, but maybe someone can shed some light on the situation.
At first, I thought my wife had gone crazy. I don't know how else to explain it. It all started after one walk. She went for a walk with our son in a small park near our house. I was still at work, but I was about to head home. My wife sometimes meets me with our child outside. According to her, she was only gone for about half an hour. Suddenly, the phone rang. My wife, in a trembling, hysterical voice, said our son had disappeared. I dropped everything and drove home. Fortunately, I work nearby, so it was only a 7-minute drive. My wife was outside our house, pale as a ghost. I asked where our child was. She said he vanished right before her eyes. I was in shock myself. I ran to the park. In my head, I thought he just ran off and got lost, and she was careless and didn't notice. He was nowhere to be found. I told her not to call the police yet. It's hard to describe what I felt at that moment. My heart wasn't just pounding. I thought it was going to jump out of my chest. To my relief, we did find our son after all. He was in the store next to the park, a small mini-market where we often buy groceries. He was sitting there, crying, waiting for his mom. The saleswoman lectured me about not watching our child and kept asking him if he knew me. After listening to her tell me what a bad father I was relieved to take his hand and lead them both home. When I had calmed down a bit, I started asking my wife questions. According to her, she turned away for a second, and when she looked back, he wasn't there. There was no one there at all. The park was empty. She called for our son, but there was no answer. At first, I thought she was in shock, but then it got worse. She said she started running around the park and saw what looked like transparent silhouettes of people. I thought, okay, let her have her valerian, I'll ask again later. I went to my son's room. I asked him, why did you run away? He said he lost his mom in the store and that I wasn't outside. I said, well, I was at work. And he calmly replied, no, all three of us went out. I clarified, what do you mean, all three of us? He said, me, mom, and you. But I was at work. My son continued, you stayed by the entrance because you saw some man you knew, and mom and I went inside. Then, according to him, mom was at the counter. He was about 2 meters away looking at a construction set. He turned around, and she wasn't there. He walked around a bit calling for his mom.
Then I realized that he probably started crying until the cashier noticed him, and he sat with her for about 15 minutes. I asked my son again. He insisted that I came home early from work that day. At that moment, my blood ran cold. My wife and I have talked about this many times. She claims she feels this is not her child, but she doesn't provide any proof. Though I also understand that something is clearly not right. She started having hysterics. She goes to that park by herself and sits there for a long time. My mind is a mess. I don't know what else to say.
A story that happened in 1998 in Illinois still causes controversy among paranormal researchers. It's about the mysterious disappearance of a young man named Matthew Brown. Matthew, a young man from a farming family, left his house in the evening to get water from a well about 50 meters away. That evening, a thick white fog blanketed the area. The fog was so dense that you couldn't see more than 2 meters. A few minutes passed. After half an hour, Matthew hadn't returned. His father and other family members went out to search with lanterns. And this is what they saw. On the wet ground, there were clear footprints from Matthew leading from the house to the well. However, about halfway down the path, they suddenly stopped. There were no footprints returning, no signs of a struggle, as if he had been lifted into the air and carried away into nothingness. Despite a thorough search of the area, reporting it to the police, and multiple searches, Matthew's body was never found. His family members claimed that as long as the fog hadn't cleared, they heard a strange, quiet voice calling for help from the spot where the young man had disappeared. A voice that sounded like Matthew, but he was nowhere to be seen. Local residents say he fell into a rift between worlds. In any case, Matthew Brown's disappearance remains unsolved to this day.
I was driving home on my usual route, but today there was a surprise. The road was closed for repairs. I had to turn onto a neighboring street that I once knew but hadn't driven on for a long time. I thought they had probably changed it a bit. It looked different somehow. There were slightly different buildings along the road, but that wasn't a problem. I drove straight ahead, expecting to get to the familiar parallel street that was supposed to lead me directly home. To my surprise, instead of an exit, the street just ended. I hit a dead end of trees and bushes, even though there should have been a passage there before. I was surprised, drove around the back alleys for a bit, but they all also led to nowhere. It started to feel creepy. I decided not to risk it and drove back, returning to the turn where I had initially turned. And soon I was back on my usual familiar road. A couple of days later, I was driving that way again, but this time with a colleague. The conversation turned to road repairs, and I said that the parallel street was a dead end and you had to go around it. My colleague disagreed, saying that it was a through street and there was no dead end. We argued a bit, and I decided to drive there one more time, hoping that maybe there was another turn that I hadn't noticed. After all, my colleague insisted that there was no dead end. We turned onto the same street, and to my surprise, I saw that the street was completely normal, with ordinary houses and, as it should, led to the parallel road, without any dead ends or walls. My colleague didn't notice anything strange, but I still don't understand what happened that evening.
This story took place in 2012. Linda Artiga, a young woman, went for a walk in the forest near her house with her brother. It was a normal day, with clear weather and a well-known route. They often walked there. But this time, something went wrong. At one point, Linda moved just a couple of meters away from her brother and disappeared. He called for her and ran along the paths, but found nothing. There was no mobile connection. The search took almost 3 hours before he heard her voice. She was standing in the exact spot where he had already searched, as if she had appeared out of nowhere. When Linda came to her senses, she was in shock. She was shaking a lot, and her speech was broken. She talked about dark people, figures without faces who were watching her from behind the trees. She described the figures as being like shadows, tall and thin, but she couldn't make out their faces. She only managed to see their eyes. They were dark gray and rounder than a human's. Neither a mouth nor nose was visible. According to her, they didn't approach, but the feeling of being watched was constant. She also said that at first she noticed that the forest had suddenly changed. The trees were taller and also seemed gray, and their branches somehow stretched downward, not upward. This forest seemed not to belong to our world. Her brother confirmed that Linda had disappeared literally in a clear space, and he had indeed searched for her in the place where she later appeared. Neither he nor the rescuers could explain how she could have hidden there. Since then, Linda is afraid of the dark and adamantly refuses to go into the forest.
I know it's hard to believe, but I also experienced something strange. I was 28 years old. It was an ordinary evening. I was riding my bicycle home through the suburbs. A straight road, 2 lanes, streetlights every 100 meters, and occasional side roads. A thick fog, dense as cotton, began to settle in front of me. To be honest, it was the first time I had seen such a dense fog. I had already started to slow down when an old, dark gray Honda flew up from behind me. It passed me abruptly, almost hitting me. A couple of seconds after it entered the fog, I heard a crash, followed by a dull roar and a prolonged metallic screech as if a car body was being torn apart. The impact was clearly strong. I stopped abruptly. I took off my headlight. My heart was pounding in my throat. I listened. Silence. I stepped into the fog. It was thick and wet. I walked forward, looking around. There was no car, no tracks. Everything looked as if nothing had happened. But I heard it. I definitely heard the crash, and then the screeching of metal. About 5 minutes later, the fog cleared a bit, and I saw my bicycle, which I had tied to the guardrail. I got on, pedaled, and rode further down the road, and for some reason, I ended up right in front of the fog. That is, behind the place I had just passed. It was as if I had gone in a circle. I felt uneasy. I quickly looked around and decided not to test my luck. I turned around and went back, deciding to take a big detour to get home. When I got a car and drove there a couple of times, nothing like that ever happened again, thankfully. Each of these stories leaves more questions than answers. What is hidden beyond the boundaries of the ordinary world? Perhaps we need to listen more carefully to the stories of those who have encountered the inexplicable. Thank you for watching until the end, and subscribe so you don't miss new mysterious stories.